Okay, well, let's hope that everybody is still signing in and joining us. Welcome everybody to the Coffee with Kathy segment, which we do once a year, and we have a number of webinars that we put on. Today, we're going to be talking about a really important subject, one that sometimes can be uncomfortable to talk about, but it really is needed. We have a very special guest who is going to talk about suicide prevention for autistic people, the risk factors, warning signs, and crisis supports. Lisa Morgan is joining us. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Lisa is the founder and co-chair of the Autism and Suicide Committee for the American Association of Suicidology. She is an autism specialist. She's a self-advocate, a consultant, a researcher, and an author, and we have almost all her books, so make sure you check out our library. We still got to get a few more, Lisa. She is a consultant for the Hospice Foundation of America and the Autism and Grief Project, and the $9 million Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute Award to TEACH, T-E-A-C-C-H. Lisa serves also on our board of directors for the Autism Society of Maine. Lisa, you are a wealth of knowledge. We certainly are going to get a lot of information today about a subject that is dear to your heart. And I think that when we were talking, it was something I felt really important that people needed to understand, that it looks very different in autistic adults when you're talking about suicide. So I am going to let everybody know at the end of the presentation, we will take questions. Please put them in the chat box and we'll monitor them that way. And without further ado, Lisa, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. It's really nice being here today. And you're right, it's very different for autistic people. And lots of times they can either not get the help they need, or they can be unintentionally harmed by well-meaning professionals. So today, I'm going to talk about autism and suicide prevalence and risk factors, as well as warning signs and considerations to take when assessing an autistic person, with warning signs used for the general public, and also talk about supporting and giving some resources. So what do we know about autism and suicide? Well, we know that suicide is a leading cause of premature death for autistic people, and that autistic people are significantly more likely to have suicidal ideation, experience a lot of the risk factors and warning signs that I'm going to be talking about. And we have a higher rate of suicide. There are different studies, and depending on the size of the study or the questions asked, it has shown to be between 7 times and 9 times higher than the suicide rate for the general population. So that's pretty high. So risk factors. All the risk factors known to increase suicide in the general population are also pertinent to autistic people. Like social isolation, that goes right into, autism being a social communication condition. Abuse, studies have shown autistic people are more vulnerable to abuse. And alexithymia is it's not an aspect of autism per se, but a lot of autistic people do experience alexithymia, which is the inability to identify and express emotions. So they can have emotions, they can have really big emotions, but not be able to even identify they're having them sometimes, and not be able to identify what they are to get themselves the help they need. And then rumination is another risk factor. And but there are unique ones for autistic people as well. One of them being co-occurring psychiatric conditions. There was a national study done in Denmark which showed out of autistic people that participated in the study, who attempted and or died by suicide, that 90% of them had a co-occurring psychiatric condition, and most of the highest two were depression and anxiety. oops, a lack of social support. And it's really difficult a lot of times for an autistic person to possibly make a support network for themselves that they can use when they, are in a crisis. Unmet support needs is a unique risk factor of suicide for autistic people. And it's actually like the number of unsupported needs. So asking for help is a social skill, and autistic people may not understand who to ask for help, what to ask for, when do they need help, especially with alexithymia. I mean, you may not even feel like you're in difficulty, in trouble. So I know I experienced alexithymia myself, and there have been times where the only way I know I'm having really high emotions is tears will come. I might not even know why, I might have to just kind of think about what's going on, but it's really hard to sometimes even know when you need help as an autistic person. And also reaching out can be a negative experience. And sometimes, especially diagnosed later in life, there's a lot of negative experiences. And so, due to misunderstandings and miscommunication, so that might be some hesitancy in reaching out. Also, as far as number of unmet support needs, an autistic person, and these are autistic people that tend to be able to live independently, on any level, and possibly can have that relationship or that job, and just can't, for whatever reason, they can't make it happen for themselves. So employment, they may not be able to get through that very verbally heavy interview process, or housing may be difficult because of executive functioning challenges. Education, I work with a lot of autistic college students who just have so much trouble being understood and just getting the assistance they need to get that education. And relationships, that's always just always a difficulty. And when they add up, that's a unique risk factor. Camouflaging or masking are risk factors. It's the same thing, camouflaging, masking. It's a strategy to fit in with others. And what happens is you hide aspects of your autism, so you look like everybody else. You don't stand out as different or odd or weird. You suppress aspects of your autism to look and act like everyone else. But what happens is the cost is exhaustion, because you are suppressing, maybe sensory stuff in the environment. So the noise that hurts, you're ignoring it. The bright lights, you're ignoring those. Could be a temperature, could be smell that you're trying to kind of work through ignoring all of that, while you're trying to put the right face on for whatever social situation you're in. You're trying to keep track of the conversation. You're trying to process about what you could say. And a lot of times, by the time you have the conversations, they're talking about something else. So it's always a hurry up and catch up kind of thing. It's exhausting to carry on for any amount of time. Also, there's a lack of sense of self, because if you've been doing it for a really long time, especially people diagnosed later in life, you may not have even developed a sense of self, or you may lose your sense of self. There's a lack of support, because if you do ask for help while masking, you might get the help a non-autistic person needs, but autistic people need something different, but you're not coming across as autistic because you're masking, and then not being known for who you are as a person. But it does help people socialize, and that is why we do it. But it hinders relationship in the end, because as you get to know the person, say you did make a friend through masking, camouflaging, and the mask kind of comes off every once in a while, and that can cause difficulties, and people have lost relationships. And it also leads to a profound loneliness of not belonging, which is thwarted belonging, which is actually another unique risk factor of suicide for autistic people. Late diagnosis, for all of the reasons stated above, being female, because a lot of times females are diagnosed later in life because they're misdiagnosed, and they go through a whole process of getting a diagnosis that doesn't fit them, and there's a lot that can happen for an autistic female. Here is a study, if anyone's interested in looking it up, about suicide in females. Autistic burnout is another unique risk factor of suicide for autistic people. It's an intense, it's exhaustion. And there are other things that lead up to it, like we've just talked about, number of unmet support needs, masking and camouflaging. It's usually with autistic people, again, who can live independently, and those people are the ones that are higher risk for suicide and suicidal ideation, attempts, and death. You are just exhausted and high anxiety and stress, and you have, if you're experiencing autism burnout, you're having a hard time functioning. Some of the other things that happen are listed here, and it can lead to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. There is a wonderful study out about autism burnout by Dora Raymaker. So warning signs. So risk factors are just like to do with a lot of people. Warning signs would be more individual, what's happening in the moment, and immediate risk for suicide. And there is less research, but we do have some resources. This one was written by me and my co-chair, Brenna Maddox, in collaboration with the Autism and Suicide Committee at AAS. It's available for a free download for anyone who wants to go to that website and get it. The purpose was to understand the need for considerations when using warning signs of suicide for the general public, to recognize differences, and to support autistic people as autistic people. These are the warning signs of suicide for the general public, taken from the website at AAS. If you got it from ASFP, you know, it might be a little different, but for the most part, they're the same. As I'm talking about these resources, I just want to make note to not make any important life-altering decisions based on the information in the following slides. These, all the warning signs for the general public do pertain to autistic people too. It's just, I'm going to show some considerations to take, so that what we don't want is for an autistic person who is in a crisis for suicide to be missed. And we also don't want an autistic person who's having trouble but not suicidal to be thought to be suicidal. So this information here is just to broaden existing knowledge about autistic people in crisis, and to remember that autistic people know the most about themselves. And so really, for autistic people, the job of professionals helping is to make space for them to communicate what they need. So these, I'm just using a couple of the warning signs for the general public. This one, no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life. This could just be the reality of an autistic person who doesn't feel like they belong, has no sense of social or cultural belonging to our society. And so they may say they don't belong to this world or never fit into this world and wish they were anywhere else but here. I always thought, you know, as a kid, I belonged in the 1800s. But these are not necessarily statements of suicide. Someone may be saying this because it's their reality. So the consideration to take here is, are they talking about just their reality? And you really need to investigate to make sure what they're saying. Feeling trapped is a warning sign for the general public. But with autism, some people have cognitive inflexibility, kind of narrows the options, and they might feel stuck. They might feel trapped in a situation or even their own thought process if they're ruminating or perseverating. A crisis situation can also cause a regression of skills, which would diminish kind of problem solving and flexible thinking as well. So again, they may speak about feeling trapped and feeling stuck, but it may not be a warning sign of suicide. It might be their autism and their autism experience but you really, really need to investigate further to find out what's really going on. Withdrawal for autistic people is a coping mechanism. A lot of people use withdrawal for self-help and in staying regulated and feeling well. It can also be a warning sign of suicide, also for autistic people. So again, investigating, the best way to find out would be to, ask patterns of withdrawing for autistic people. Say if somebody typically came home from work or school or a social event and kind of withdrew into their room or into themselves for, an hour or so, and then they were able to regulate and feel that they can finish the day or finish the evening okay. And then that person suddenly, it's an hour and a half, it's 2 hours, and they're coming out and they're not regulated still. And they have difficulty finishing the day or the evening, or just having difficulty regulating even after withdrawing. That would be a cause of concern to look to see if it is a warning sign of suicide. But again, talking, investigating, communicating is so very important. This warning sign for the general public. Well, there are autistic people that do have a very strong emotional connection to pets, to objects, to possessions. This can go into even adults, and some of the pets may be therapy pets that they're very attached to. So this behavior really does warrant further investigation for autistic people if they start giving away these possessions, especially possessions that may be part of their special interests or passions. Remember the person you're helping, remember the person before you. Autistic people may have other reasons for giving away prized possessions. And again, communication is just so important. And remembering the person you're communicating with is autistic. Because autistic people think very literally. So when you are investigating, you want to make sure that you use a few words as possible, get straight to the point, and no hinting, especially if someone's in a crisis. And remember that they're very literal. So if you want an answer, you have to ask it in the way that you're going to get the answer you want. So for example, you're working with somebody and they're in crisis. If they're asked, do you want to hurt yourself? Do you want to hurt yourself? They may say no, but that's not the end of that conversation if they're autistic, because they may not want to hurt themselves, but they're going to. They're planning on it, but they've answered exactly what you've asked. So you have to ask what you want to know. So are you going to hurt yourself? Just straight out, blatant, honest truth, few words as possible, getting straight to the point is going to get the information that you're trying to get from them to help them. And even like, there's also some nuances here about literal speech. If you're helping them with on a crisis line or in a text, a crisis text line, and you say, I'm here for you, and you're not, they're going to take that very literal, and it could be a trust issue, and you want to build up trust as much as you can in the shortest amount of time as you can. So saying I'm here with you, or even I understand, and you're not autistic. I mean, autistic people can be very, very literal and will take each word as its dictionary meaning and not even understand social nuances. This resource was developed by an international team of researchers, clinicians, and autistic people. And we've come up with a proposed set of warning signs for autistic people. So not using the warning signs of the general public, but actually using what could be warning signs for autistic people. And here they are. They're somewhat similar, but there's a lot of differences as well. So sudden or increased withdrawal, not just withdrawal, but sudden or increased. No words to communicate acute distress. This one's really important because when I have been in crisis or been in distress and I do lose my words and have no way to communicate, I might be able to say, I have no words. And I've had people say, okay, well, let me know when you want to talk, or okay, well, we'll talk about it next time, or, we'll see you later, or, and they're leaving me in a worse crisis than when I could talk. Because with a lot of autistic people, if they start losing their words, they're going into a worse crisis situation inside. It can be internal. They could be presenting calm and quiet. And so calm and quiet means okay in our society most of the time. So number 3 is a current traumatic event. Marked increase in rate and or severity of self-harm. So notice it's not self-harm, it's marked increase in rate or severity of self-harm. Worsening of anxiety or depression. A new focus on death-related topics that are not a special interest. I was working with a young kid. He was like 6 or 7 years old, and in church he heard about, somebody had stood up and given their testimony, which included suicide, and they described what happened to them in detail. And this kid was, fascinated. It became his passion. He was just so fascinated about it. He wouldn't stop talking about it, which made some people, including me, think even at a young age that he might be suicidal. And people as young as 5 have died by suicide. It was as simple as asking him if he understood he was making people nervous by talking about suicide. He was like, no, why? And we told him that some people actually, might do it, if trying to explain it to a 6-year-old in 6-year-old words. And he was like, oh, okay. And he was pretty much okay with it then, but you have to just check and ask questions and investigate. Perceptive suicidal thoughts and ruminations. This is just a real difficulty for autistic people experiencing suicidal ideation. Those thoughts can just stick, and you can perseverate and ruminate, even if you're working or, playing or watching TV or writing, whatever you're doing, your special, the thing that you love the most, you can still have that background task in the back, ruminating on suicidal ideation. Definitely a warning sign. And seeking means and making plans for suicide or suicidal rehearsal. That suicide rehearsal can be physical, or it can be a mental suicidal rehearsal, which goes along with suicidal ideation, but you're just thinking about it, you're going through the steps. Those are all warning signs. Statements about no reason for living or no sense of purpose in life. And then hopelessness. I'm just going to take a couple to show you what the resource looks like. So no words to communicate acute distress. The warning sign has under each warning sign, this resource has a scenario that explains what it could look like for an autistic person. So this is a very, very small bit of the scenario for this one. So you got Lizzie lives with suicidal ideation, PTSD, autism, and has made at least one suicidal attempt to stop emotional pain. And then it talks about, losing the ability to communicate. You just can't get the words from your thoughts to your mouth to say them out loud. They're swirling in her mind. She can't catch them. And so when she needs help the most, she can't reach out for help. And that's her experience. And then there's research to back it up, which shows that autistic adults who have attempted suicide are significantly more likely to report not telling anyone because of not knowing either how to communicate this or not being able to. So each of the warning signs has this setup where you have scenario and then research. Number 7, perseverative thoughts and ruminations. Again, another scenario where somebody is fascinated by the topic of suicide and has perseverated on it, and then realizes that she's actually started to personalize the suicide to her own life and starts to experience suicidal ideation until it became a comfort, and now it's a problem. for this one person in the scenario. So the research shows that autistic people are more likely to report what they said, sticky suicidal thoughts. It can last a long period of time. For myself, it was months of perseverating thoughts and ruminations. And I live with suicidal ideation, so I continue to actually ruminate on it and perseverate on it. So it's just really difficult to get away from whatever's going on in your mind, whether they're images, intentions, nightmares. But it is shown to increase the risk of suicide attempt. So here's another resource that's going to help communicate with and support autistic people. Some autistic people don't disclose they're autistic, so this resource shows how to identify you might be working with or might be helping an autistic person who has not disclosed their autism to you. So it shows that they may express difficulty with sensory issues, may present with opposite emotions, which again, if you're supporting somebody and they start laughing, that does not mean that they're not in crisis for an autistic person. Because an autistic person, even without alexithymia, has difficulty with emotions. And with alexithymia, it just exacerbates that. So they may laugh, and another thing a lot of people don't understand, and it's happened to me, I can be in distress and in crisis, and I see something funny, and I'm compartmentalized enough where, oh, that was funny, I laugh. They think I'm feeling better. I'm not. I just laugh because something was literally just funny. So I remember that strong ability to compartmentalize. So this is just knowledge for when you're working with an autistic adult, this may happen, or person, this may happen. So difficulty identifying and verbalizing emotions, not knowing how to cope with or what to do with emotions. Again, this is really a difficulty if people were diagnosed later in life. I was diagnosed at 48 years old. I never knew what to do with emotions. They were just very uncomfortable to me, and I avoided them at all possibility. But you may come across it when you're helping somebody and, well, what are you feeling right now? I don't know. You might get that. It might be better to ask what they're thinking. And then as the conversation goes along, you may be able to kind of discern what's happened, but staying away from words of emotion. Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling sad? Are you excited? Are you scared? They may not be able to answer that. Expresses difficulty or inability to make friends or sustain relationships. A lot of autistic people have experienced this many, many times in their lives, and that's kind of an identifying piece of knowing you might be working with someone who's autistic. And may use echolalia, which is a repeating of word sounds and responses. So it also can sound almost like taunting, especially if somebody's repeating words that have just been said by somebody, and they're repeating those words and they don't understand echolalia. It might be enough for the helper to think, well, this person's not in crisis. They're kind of being, teasing, or they're in a different place, but it's echolalia. So understanding that there can be a history of countless misunderstandings and miscommunications in their lives is really important, because if you're supporting an autistic person who is saying they're in crisis and saying they, giving words alluding to, they might be thinking of suicide or at least suicidal ideation because they lost a friend. You might think, well, everybody loses friends and it's okay, and we'll get through this. But for an autistic person, that might be the only friend they had. And it's so difficult to make a new friend. It's different. It's different for autistic people. They may have poured hours and hours and days into this relationship, and they don't even know why it might have ended as well, which is a common experience for autistic people. So it's a different type of situation. It's not like, oh, well, I can just go make more friends. You can, autistic people are able to do that, but it's also in a lot of ways difficult. Unusual patterns of speech, such as odd pitch, tone, pace, or even robotic. If you're not, if you don't know the person's autistic and this kind of happens, you might, it's an identifying feature that you may be working with someone who's autistic. Also, knowing that this might happen can help you to not make any other kind of assumptions of why they might be talking this way. The verbal response time may be different. Processing speed differs for all, autistic people in especially in crisis. So giving time for them to answer, giving time for them to regulate, giving time for them to just possibly sit there is very helpful and supportive. A lot of non-autistic people might, when they're trying to help somebody who's in a crisis and having a really difficult time, they might make small talk. That's not going to help an autistic person. Small talk to most autistic people is very difficult and takes a lot of energy, and we don't see the sense in it. So that's not really going to help. So seeing the person before you and understanding, they might be much better off and be more comforted sitting in silence. A hand on a shoulder is also supportive and comforting to many people, but not necessarily autistic people. Ask first, definitely, if you're going to give a hug or a encouraging hand on the shoulder when working with autistic people. Also, no autistic people may ruminate on those thoughts, and changing their perceptions and kind of getting unstuck is a difficult process to help them with. And I suggest using something that they love. And if you don't know them and you're working with them and you don't know them, you can ask direct questions about what they love doing, how do they spend their time. Talking about that may be enough to help them out of that perseverating loop that they might be in. And remember again that autistic people can be very, very literal communicators. So we need to work together. Stakeholder engagement is very, very important. So autistic people, what I like to say is help us help you help us, because it's almost like we've been invited to the table now in some research priorities and research studies, but it almost seems like we're still not being taken completely serious about what we need that's different from what non-autistic people need. So stakeholder engagement in collaborating with autistic people, trying to understand what autistic people need that's different, even if it makes no sense to non-autistic people, believing them, engaging in what they need. It may seem kind of opposite to when you're supporting somebody in a crisis and they want to be sitting there in silence, maybe even having you a couple feet away if you're in person there with them, may seem counterintuitive to helping them, but if that's what they need, that's what they need. Making small talk again, they may not help them. And in giving them support as far as keeping them safe, they may need things differently. They may need to know what to say. They may need to know who to ask. And these are things that, it could be easy to say, well, they're adults, they should already know this or something, but they may need to write it down. They may need to practice and rehearse what happens when the phone rings or the email comes, and how to get themselves even, more help and more into the process. So stakeholder engagement is very, very important. So INSAR, which is the International Society of Autism Research, came up with the autism community's 10 priorities for suicide prevention. And these are what autistic people have come up with that they would love to know about more through research studies. And I've shared them here with you because this is what autistic people kind of, it gives you an idea of what they kind of struggle with and what they want to know. So what barriers do autistic people experience when seeking help, which may put them at greater risk of suicide? So this goes into, well, unintentionally harmed by well-meaning people. So the night that I found that my husband had died by suicide, I had a lot of people there who were helping me, but I was also unintentionally harmed by those same people. When the police directed me where to stand in front of the garage doors while they went in to do the wellness check on my husband, they didn't realize they put me right next to him. And with my acute sense of smell, I realized standing there alone, my husband was dead just on the other side of the garage doors from where I was standing and had been for several days. Then when they came out and they gave me the news, they surrounded me very, very quickly because they didn't want me to run into the house. Again, that's keeping me safe, but I was overwhelmed by them surrounding me, and I went down and sat on the driveway, and I'm sure they thought it was the news, but I already knew the news. And then someone put a hand on my shoulder, and for months afterwards, when I thought about that moment, that hand, I could feel that hand on my shoulder because I did not know what it meant. I didn't know it was coming. So this kind of just went on and on. The victim advocate, she was very kind. She was being helpful, but interacting with her therapy dog was not what I needed. And I kept telling her that, but she didn't. She was sure it was going to help me, but I'm a cat person. She was sure sitting in her car was going to help me, but I needed to pace. She was sure all kinds of information about community services was going to encourage me. I couldn't keep any information in my head. The best thing she did for me was to give me pamphlets to look at later when I was regulated. I couldn't make eye contact and thought people were going to think I was lying. I mean, it went on and on and on. And these are all people that were there to help me. But when they left, I felt completely, absolutely, profoundly alone and traumatized from what happened and from the help. Moving on to what are the risk factors? No, protective factors is more. We know some risk factors, but we don't know what protective factors are. And some studies have shown that protective factors for non-autistic people don't work with autistic people because it's right around the risk factors of suicide for us. So protective factors for non-autistic people, marriage, a higher education, access to healthcare, mental health or physical health care, relationships, and those are all difficulties for us. All places that we a lot of times have. We can do it and we can have those things, but it's not easy all the time at all. So knowing the protective factors is going to be really important for us. To what extent are autistic people not believed about the severity of their distress? And that speaks to not being able to explain what's happening with us, not having the words. If we're crying and screaming, and people will think we're in trouble and maybe help us. But if we're quiet and calm, that's not usually attractive, attracts people to help you because they don't think you need help. Further understanding suicide, where mental health is not a factor across the lifespan. It has to do with those other things like relationships and education and getting a job and things like that. And then how can we best identify and assess suicidal thoughts and behaviors in autistic people in research and clinical practice? That's definitely needed. There's a lot of unintentional harm by well-meaning professionals there as well. The rest are, how should interventions be adapted for autistic people in individual presentations? Well, my thought on that is don't adapt them, start from scratch for interventions for autistic people based solely on autistic people and how we live and experience the world. What is this experience of suicidality in autistic people? Is it different than the general population? How do autistic people seek help when they're in crisis? These are all very much priorities for autistic people because this is where we struggle a lot. How well do existing models of understanding suicide apply to autistic people? Personally, I don't think they do very well because they're just not based on how we think and process the world, which is much differently, because our brains are different. We have autistic brains. That's also been proven through MRIs and things. What is the impact of poor sleep on suicide risk in autistic people, and how can this be measured? Because that is something that autistic people struggle with as well. This is just a quote in one of the articles that I wrote. Suicide is like a killer in our midst that no one wants to talk about instead of meeting it head on. And I just want to encourage, it is not something, it's not pleasant to talk about. It's not pleasant to relive lived experience and, talk about people struggling and dying, but that's what needs to happen. The more we talk about it, the less it will be stigmatized and the more people will get the help that they need. So we really do need to keep the conversation going. And that's it for me today, Kathy. So we have a little bit of extra time for questions.
Yeah, we do. Lisa, that was excellent. There's so much good information in there that I think the general population had no idea. So I do thank you. And just so everybody knows, this is being recorded. It is going to go up on our website. It'll be available. So if you found that it was impactful, and please pass that on. We're going to be probably take about a week for us to get the recording off, get it up and get it on our website. Once we do that, we'll send it out on our Facebook channels just to let people know that it's now available for you to view on our website. I will look and see. I know some people were mentioning comments about some of the links that you had there, and I don't know if that answering their question where this is going to be available or if there's any way we can put some of those links in the chat box. I think there were links to some of the studies you were having, Lisa. I don't know if that's something we could do. We could find them and then send them out or attach them, or
I can how about if I email you the links?
Yeah, you do
Would that work? And then or do you need them now?
I think one of them was asking about, can you share the link for the download? I'm not sure if that was download of the presentation or if it was the download of just the links.
Some of the links of the resources are in these slides.
Right. Okay.
And then I believe the research studies that I put up do have the information on to find them.
Okay. All right. So why don't I ask them, because I think these are some of the questions that people might have on their mind, and I didn't see anything right now besides the link one, but so if I had a friend and I was concerned about that friend, but I'm not sure what to say. So I'm concerned that somebody I know that has autism, where would I start? What would be the first thing I should do if I have a concern about an autistic adult?
Definitely start the conversation. Are you okay? I am concerned about you. Can you tell me something about what's going on with you? Again, I'm staying away from those words of emotion, like, how are you feeling? I would not ask that because typically it's like, fine, how are you? And it's not a solid, substantive question anymore in society. It's more of a hello. I would ask, are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything that you want to talk about? And are you planning on, are you thinking about harming yourself or dying by suicide? Asking that question, research has shown that it does not put the idea into anyone's head. If you're concerned about them, they're probably already thinking it. It doesn't give them the idea. If they have the idea, it doesn't give them more of an idea. what it actually research has shown is it opens the communication line so that finally, and there's a lot of relief with that, finally they know who they can talk to because this person just asked me. And it kind of opens the door. So it's actually a good thing to do if you're concerned about anyone who might be suicidal or have suicidal ideation. Ask them right out. And again, no hinting, and use few words as possible. Blatantly honest, straight to the point. That's especially with an autistic person who is having trouble to the point where you are concerned about them. It's going to be more difficult for them to see, kind of sift through a lot of words, because most likely, their regulation may be unstable. They may be, not able to process as well because they're having difficulty. So just few words as possible, straight to the point, being really honest.
And I do have somebody who raised their hand. So do you mind if I allow them to ask a question, Lisa?
Sure.
Go ahead, Karen. I think I've unmuted you, or have I?
She's still muted.
I think I can.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah, there you go, Karen. We hear you now.
Great. I did send in a couple questions to the Q&A, so I don't know if you haven't gotten them yet or there is a problem.
No, I just saw them now. I was looking
Okay.
into the chat box and not the Q&A. I'm sorry, Karen.
That's okay. Do you want me to ask them or just?
Go ahead and ask them,
Okay. Well, so one is, Ms. Morgan, I was wondering if you have given this presentation at NAMI, Maine, and I hope you will if you haven't already.
I have not. I have given it to NAMI in other states.
Okay.
I don't mind giving it to, I'd be happy to give it to NAMI, Maine as well.
Yeah, I've had suicide prevention trainings with them, which are fabulous, and I'm sure that they would welcome you. My specific situation is that my 25-year-old grandson is going to be graduating from USM with his bachelor's degree in about 3 weeks. One question I wonder about, and I had, even before this presentation, I had certainly not thought of these risk factors in terms of the potential for suicide risk. But I know that although he's very stable in many, many ways, I was already concerned that this time period where we're going to have to make sure that he's working on his resume, and just the idea of him coming up with a direction where he wants to head, and just all the stressors involved, and having to interview and all those things. He has had many like summer jobs and temporary jobs where he's done very well, but I just anticipated already that this would be a very stressful period for him, and how can I support him? So this has helped me really get a sense of, I really have to stay on top of sort of where he's at. But the other part of it is that I hear that the potential for suicidal ideation and even action is many times higher than the general population. But on top of it, he's gay, and I believe that that also brings a higher potential for suicide. So I just wondered how those two fit together, and I will listen to anything that you want to share.
Yes, this is a time of change, and change is difficult for autistic people. It would be really nice if he's looking forward to the change, but if the change is causing him anxiety, I would just kind of always try to break it down into pieces for him that he, there might be something that he needs to get done first, and kind of forget the rest, and let's just concentrate on this until that's done, and then take the next step and take the next step. So it's not completely overwhelmed. He's not completely overwhelmed by it all. A lot of autistic people identify with different genders as well. That's pretty common, and they do kind of have it, have a double, I don't want to say double whammy, but they have challenges in different areas, yes. But sometimes there's clubs on campus. Sometimes there's, especially if he has a diagnosis, he can get help on campus. I would be really, if possible, with him to advocate to see if they understand autism. I work with a lot of college kids where they reach out for help doesn't understand autism, so they're not getting the help they need. And then they say, well, we're helping him, but no, he's going there and you're talking to him, but he's not getting help because they don't understand autism. So making sure the people who are helping him do understand autism and the challenges that autistic kids have. But yeah, breaking it down and talking about change and just being really open and with communication about him every step of the way would all be preventative measures to take.
I do have another one that came in the question and answer, Lisa.
Sure.
So this is somebody who's anonymous as an attendee. How can I support my teenage daughter who is on the spectrum but is rejecting her diagnosis? She also has been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and ADHD, has been hospitalized once for self-harming and suicide ideology. I think I said that right. Sorry, pardon me if I didn't. I feel it's important for her to understand and accept her diagnosis, and I see her exhaustion from masking for so long. I'm also worried that trying to get her to accept and understand her diagnosis could be a risk factor for suicide. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. There are a lot of people. It took me, I'm 10 years out from my diagnosis and still struggle with accepting it because of what it means in today's society. And a teenager is gonna, I'm sure, have a lot more trouble with that. What you can do is take the things that she's struggling with the most, whether it's making friends or socializing, and don't maybe not bring up the word autism, but let's problem solve about this. And it's socialize. Let's or if it's executive function, let's talk about how it's difficult for you to gather all of your books and get your homework in, and just talking about the things that she needs to work on and succeed at, but not use the word autism right now for her. Because whether you call it autism or you don't, it's still the same challenges that she has to overcome, and she may be more willing to work at it if it's just, I'm having difficulty with gathering my books, I'm having difficulty making friends, I'm having difficulty with whatever it is that she's struggling with, and kind of leave the word autism out of there. I think if it was my daughter, I would continue to leave that in the conversation at times, depending on how well she would be able to take it. But I have adults who won't allow the word autism, adults who are autistic, who won't allow the word autism to be said in front of them. And that there's a lot that goes along with that as far as society. And, autistic advocates are really trying hard to change that conversation. And autism is not, it's not something to be down on. We're not less than, we're not, we're different. That's what we are. We're different, and we think differently, and we're creative, and we're all these wonderful things. But she's not alone. A lot of people do have trouble with that. I hope I answered that question okay.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think sometimes talking about the conversation and not having autism in the conversation helps.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But I do have another question that came in. This is a local high school, somebody that works at a local high school. They work in an autism classroom, and 7 of their students are in the process waiting to change their gender. They're trying to understand this, but it seems that anxiety and depression is an underlying cause. And what can you tell them about this? Or do you have any suggestions around this? I do know that this seems to be, I know the society gets a lot of calls about the gender identity. And so we have some sources that we use here in our agency that we hand out, but Lisa, do you have anything around that?
I am pretty sure I just read a new study about gender and autism that if I can find it and pass it through to you, if you can get this person's email or
Yeah.
something to give them to, because I know a lot of autistic people do identify in somehow, a different gender than they were born with. And they're just starting to research now, like why that might be, what's part of, what is all in all of that. And that's really all my specialty is autism and suicide. And as a true autistic person, I'm pretty black and white about that, but I do read other things as well. And I do think I read something that may shed some light on it for you.
Yeah, I can get that. If you can get it to me, I certainly can get it to the person who reached out about that.
Okay.
But I think there's a follow-up question from the anonymous person who reached out. So I'll ask that. It was for the previous question. They're saying, I should also say that she's been receiving treatment for mental health and PTSD, which she does
Okay.
not have and was ruled out by neuropsych. So they feel it's another barrier to her that she received the wrong treatment for the wrong diagnosis. And we've seen this more than once.
Yep.
She's completely unable to accept responsibility for anything or acknowledge her struggles and needs, and has learned to blame others when she is dysregulated. And I guess it's hard to know how to help her when she is stuck in her thinking. So it does seem like, there's ongoing things here. So what's your thoughts on that, Lisa?
Well, the tricky part is that autistic professionals who work with autistic people, they have had the training of, through the DSM-5 as a medical model, and they don't understand the unique presentation of a female autistic person. They don't understand. So many females get diagnosed with, what's that called? It's a personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, because they show empathy, or can, or make eye contact, which, some autistic people can do and some can't. Some autistic people are extroverted and love flashiness and being with people. It's just, she's probably being misunderstood. It's, there's not enough research, and I get frustrated with the research, but I've heard from enough autistic people and my own lived experience that autistic people can have PTSD through years and years and years of being misunderstood, of getting the wrong diagnosis, of negative, experiences with your peers. There's many reasons why autistic people have PTSD. So she probably is not getting the help that she needs. And, a lot of autistic people are not only not getting the help, but they're unintentionally harmed. And I say unintentional because the professionals don't understand what they're doing. But nevertheless, people are being harmed.
Somebody else is saying that their daughter identifies as, BPD. That's the bipolar, I think, personality disorder, or did I say that wrong? Borderline personality disorder, sorry. And they're struggling to find her the right providers and don't know how to find them. What should we be looking at? Do you know who we should be looking to, because that's part of what we do here at the societies. We help navigate and find services. Are there specialists that are, around that diagnosis, or should anybody who's either psychologist, psychiatrist understand that? I think it's the autism piece that throws everybody.
Yeah. If somebody wants to be assessed, if it's a female and they want to be assessed for autism, going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist that does not understand autism and checking off the box and saying I'm a specialist in autism doesn't mean much when all they've gotten is, you know, I'm looking in the DSM-5 and does it match the DSM-5? There are 2 organizations that I know of where they've seen this niche of people falling through the cracks. Most of them females who think they're autistic, or even, you know, have a different gender and they think they're autistic as well. GRASP has an assessment process. It's very thorough. It costs between $700 and $800. If you need a scholarship, they're actually scheduling about 8 years out. If you have the money to pay, they're scheduling, I believe it's in the fall of 2023, early 2024. That's in the US. There's also one in Australia that anyone in the world can be assessed by. Unfortunately, they just had a major flood, so I don't have a lot of information. I work for them and I'm like the US person. And so autistic people looking for a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, PTSD, you know, it covers quite a bit. I guess contact me. My email's on here. And I am the person in the US that would then get you what you need from what's called Neurodiversity Hub. All the testing is online, but it's all kind of happening in Australia, so the time zones are kind of tricky. It can happen, but I would not go to, if it was me, my daughter, a friend, I would not just say, okay, this psychologist who next to his name is marked off saying he's an autism specialist, but I have no other, he has no other like trainings or experience to back him up. I would not take the person there. Once you get a diagnosis that's not yours, there's no other psychiatrist or psychologist that would go against that first diagnosis. So it's almost better off to not have one than to have a wrong one.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we do have a number of names in our system, and the names we collect actually come from people who received the diagnosis. So we don't get like the professional, we get the families who will say they did a real thorough job, and we ask questions.
Something else, something to back them up like that.
Yeah. So that's how we get ours in, and it looks like we're out of time for today. And I want to make sure, Lisa, that I thank you so much for providing this presentation, providing the audience with some really valuable tools that they can take back. And it will be, like I said, on the website. It's recorded so people can still see it. If you still have questions you want to ask Lisa, her email is right here. Please reach out to her and see if she can help you in any other way. But I do want to thank everybody for today, and thank you, Lisa, very much.
And thank you, Kathy, for the opportunity. I always love the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to be ending the session in just a minute here. I got to make sure I'm doing this good.
Do you want me to stop sharing or?